whatever. All right, I'm talking about open source projects, and this year I've been working on a new project every single month, and I'll talk about really why I've been doing that, and then I'm going to be covering the 6 projects I've been working on, but this is really a 2-part presentation, because if I were to cover all 6, it would be 2 hours long. So to kind of keep me on track, I'm just going to be covering 3 of them, and that way I can dive into them more, and if you have any questions about them, we can kind of cover them. So getting into the why I started doing this, and I was inspired by one of my friends, and he wrote this blog post about kind of rediscovering short-term goals. And for myself, I used to be really involved with doing open source projects and kind of being a part of the community, the development community that's online. And I wanted to contribute to these really, really big projects. But because my goals were like set on like building something from start to finish that would be an 8-month-long project, I never really made any progress with it. So at the beginning of this year, I kind of reevaluated and said, instead of doing this really large project, I'm going to do a series of really small projects. And they're all actually going to be coupled together at the end into a bigger open source project that I'm working on. So these 6 that I will be talking about, and by next month I'll have a 7th one, but these are all going to be incorporated into this whole UI toolkit that I'm building. That's going to be guidelines for both designers as well as developers. And these are really just the first 3 inside here. So my buddy Jay Clouse had this really great quote. Does anyone here know Jay Clouse? Yeah, so Jay does a lot of things in the community. He's a community organizer. Startup Weekend is his main thing. He has this blog, and he had this really honest and open blog post about how he had these large goals for putting on blogs, and he just wanted to do it, but he spent 6 months thinking about what he was going to write and never actually wrote anything. But now he writes a new blog post every week, and they're kind of short and they're topical. Some are related to each other and overlap, but the idea is that that was his goal. So instead of just like constantly getting caught up in the planning of all of it, it's more about just doing it. So that's why that's highlighted right there. And with this, I also just really wanted to make some stuff, and I really like making stuff, and by lowering and reducing these projects and making them something smaller, it made it become something very feasible. So the first one that I'm focusing on is, when, as I said, I'm doing a new one every single month. And I'm going to continue this at least this year, but I hope to continue this in future years. And I would love to have you guys also contribute and suggest ideas for me on different projects. Or if you want to do something similar, it's way easier than it may seem. It's really not that much time invested. Maybe on a Saturday night, instead of going out, I just work on my computer really late and come up with an idea and build it out. So the first one that I'm hitting on is really not anything that great, but it's just about reusable glyphs. So when I build out projects, there are a lot of things that I do constantly over and over again, and one of which is the setup of using custom glyphs. So glyphs are just basically could be described as graphical text icons. So like Font Awesome uses glyphs. So they're characters that are associated with an image of some sort. So I wrote that same code over and over again from project to project, and it got to the point where it's like I'm always using the same pattern. So I took a couple steps back and wanted to write it in a way that I could reuse it on other projects and hopefully influence other people to use it. So with this one, it's really just utilizing the data attribute and pulling in that character that you have inside there and styling it with CSS. It has a before, it also has an after, but then I also added in this no speak, because no speak is a CSS property that allows screen readers to overlook a special character, a glyph, or Unicode. So it doesn't have that throwback if you have a screen reader on. So I hope you guys can see this, but this is just from my CodePen. So all these are on my CodePen. It's codepen.io/nice transition. So I'm nice transition on CodePen. And this is just a basic div setup. So there's a class here. And what this is going to be the example of is the glyph before. So with this, I'm utilizing this U dash, and that is just a utility class. So it's just kind of the syntax or the conventions that I've been using on all my projects. So I use U for utility, C for component, O for objects, JS for JavaScript, underscore for a hack. And as I'm kind of building out these smaller pieces, again, it's aiming towards a bigger toolkit that will be my big open source project that hopefully by the end of the year, I have something at least moving with that. So that's what you'll see. You'll see UC a lot in these projects, but the U just stands for utility. So with this, it's u-glyph-before. So this is if I want a glyph to come before some text. So down here it says I have a glyph before me. And then if I add the data attribute, which is data-icon, and then put a value inside of it, it's going to apply that X in front of it. So right now you can see that this is a sans serif font, but right here is a serif font. And that's because I'm using CodePen, and it's not bringing in the custom web font. But this is set up and also isn't just the before and after, but it has architecture about embedding a custom web font to utilize on your project. So really all you have to do is change the path to your custom web font on your site. So if you use like icomoon.io to generate your font, you can follow this pattern. So this is it before. To do something after, it's just changing that the selector to dash after as opposed to dash before. And now you're going to have the X afterwards. But then it can also be used as just a pure replacement. So you can just have u-glyph. And then because it's a pure replacement, I don't need that data attribute anymore. And I can just put my character inside there, and it's going to render. So you can see that it's a sans serif down here at the bottom. Now, to make this demo make a little bit more sense and to really utilize and show custom glyphs, I have just the Unicode, and I've embedded font awesome in this demo. So this is the Unicode for, I forget which character, but it's just related to something in font awesome. And you'll see that it turns to a star. And this is just a very simple one. This one took me about like maybe 20 minutes at most to put together. And I just wanted to make sure that it'd be something reusable. And with all these projects, one of the things that everyone really hates doing is writing documentation. So all these projects that I have on my CodePen, I'm making sure I'm putting thorough documentation and how to utilize and architect and build these out. So this may seem something small and not that significant, but you can share it with your team, and it's a block of code that you can use. You have a question?
So what's the difference, pro or con, instead of using like an I tag and then specifying a class name that's like readable, like I-emoji or something like that?
Well, you could change it. So the setup is to use u-glyph. It's a little bit of a semantic name, but it's a helper class. So, or it's a helper utility class, so it should have really highest like specificity and overrides, and should be like last in your CSS file, so it's overriding with it. You could change the selector name to be whatever, but as I'm aiming and building out this full UI kit, these are kind of the conventions that I'm using. But you could utilize it and change it to be whatever you want. And this kind of should go without saying, but you can apply this class to any HTML element, and it will work the same way, with the only limitations to form elements or anything. What are those called, Eric? I always forget. Yeah, void elements are the only things that you can't apply this to. So any element that allows the before and after setup, this can be utilized. I've even used the same setup without a data glyph, and it was just the setup of putting an icon before and changing how I was going to embed, so reusing the CSS properties from these classes. All right, so the next one, and this one's a little bit longer to talk about, but this is about responsive suffixes. So this is really related to crafting and architecting out responsive solutions. And this one may be a little bit more confusing and maybe controversial to certain people, but it's really just this approach for crafting selectors that target just large size screens, medium size screens, and small size screens, or anything from small to medium or medium to large. And how this is set up is there's a series of, and kind of giving credit to where this idea came from, Harry Roberts or CSS Wizardry wrote this article, BEM it, and it's about taking kind of BEM a step further and really utilizing it for architecture for the digital landscape, and especially responsive. So with it, he had outlined selectors that are appended to the end of your selector. So you have your selector name, and then you put at large. So these are targeting your UI for things that are above. The next one is at medium, so the medium size. And then there's small for small screens. And then there's medium to large as well as from small to medium. So you have your selector, and you make variations of your selector that can be utilized at certain screen widths. And I'll show you a demo of what this looks like, because this may sound really confusing, but this is just appended to the end of your selector. And you have to write your CSS code for it. So with this, it's written in Sass, and this is the first mix-in that's kind of available. And you really don't need to utilize the other ones, and this kind of gives you what you need out of it, but there's other pieces and parts of this. So if those that aren't familiar with Sass, I may lose you on this, but you can follow the documentation if you want to utilize it and are using Sass. But Suffixes is the name of this project, and that's the main mix-in. So here we have an O container. That's not part of it. It's just a container for this div for the demo. So if I write a selector, and this is going to be the color red, this should just seem basic to everyone here. This is just basic CSS. So I'm going to be applying a selector, and I've created CSS that says this selector has a color of red. So no matter what, of course, the color is red, no matter what the screen dimension is. If I look at the compiled code, it's 1 for 1, because we're in Sass, and I haven't added anything in Sass. Now, if I wrap it with the mix-in that I wrote, which is called Suffixes, and I put my CSS properties inside there, it's going to generate code that will allow me to use those suffix at the end of my selectors. So right here, this is still using the same thing, because it outputs also the selector with that color red, as I showed. So nothing has changed right now. But if I go up to the DOM and I change it to @large, now you'll see that as my screen goes bigger, it remains red, and as it goes smaller, it gets removed. So that selector is only being applied to @large screen sizes. Now this can also be changed to small, and the reverse will happen to it. So now the color is only red on small screens. And then the two of them can kind of be combined. And I can target large and small. So in any interface, of course, you can use as many selectors as you want. And here you can kind of see them acting back and forth. So now getting into some of the options that you have inside there, you can pass arguments inside Sass. So inside of this, it's Suffixes, and then you put the param in there, and I can pass BP, which is for breakpoint, and I can define a width inside there. So this is if the width is 800, the color is going to be red, and below 800, the color on the bottom is going to be red. So you kind of have control on that. Now the caveat with this is I would recommend only having, like these should be based off of global breakpoints. It's kind of hard to do this and manage and maintain that throughout a project. But this is really just to show you that you can override that breakpoint. And for specific modules, you may want to change where it is. And I have a demo of kind of a grid system based off of this. All right, so again, showing the selector and the color red and those two kind of inversing back and forth. So those are like the really three options that come out of this. And I can add as many properties as I want inside there. I'm just showing color. This is the output code, the basic selector, but then it creates this version of it that's the @large as well as the @small. So it takes the content of that CSS, the CSS properties, and injects them and just appends the @large and @small. You can also overwrite the suffix if you wanted to, change it to something instead of large or something instead of small. Lots of options inside there. All right, so the next one is, as I was showing here, the selector was being output. There's actually a lot of times where you may not want to have the default being put out there. So there's a variable that you can say base is turned off. So now that first one, that selector doesn't actually have a style. It's only outputting the large and the small. There's a shorthand for this if you just want to target and create something for small screens. And what that is you take Suffixes and you add small at the end. And the arguments are a little bit more limited, but you can still pass breakpoint in there and also the base. Those are the primary two. On the large one, it's pretty much the same, and this will show you kind of the combination in the shorthand of using the large mixin. So there was a small in the output that read's only working on small. And this is a pretty lengthy documentation on this, but so this is going to say that my color is green above the 400 pixels, and the bottom one will only be red. But if you combine the two, you can actually use those two CSS selectors on the same line. So that's why it's kind of nice to have like the large and the small, because I can say when it's above a certain breakpoint, I want my color to be green. When it's below that breakpoint, I want my color to be red. So I apply those two selectors on there, and you can kind of see as it goes smaller, it turns red. As it goes bigger, it turns green. This is very useful for grid systems too. So it's writing the same code, but making it be utilized in different contexts based off of variables around the browser. It also, as a developer, in looking at your DOM and your CSS selectors, it gives you visibility to what styling is actually being applied on small screens versus large screens. So it makes it a little bit easier to manage and maintain your code. Now, the medium one, I'm not going to lie, is actually really confusing, because medium there's small, and then there's large. So if we said this was our breakpoint, say this was 500, so large is above 500, small is below 500. But now medium, you need another breakpoint to define what medium is. So let's say it's 200 and 500. So small is everything from 0 to 200. Medium is everything from 200 to 500. And large is everything from 500 and above. So that's why medium gets really confusing. And that's why there is small through medium. And then, so small through medium would be like everything from 0 to 500. And then medium to large is everything from medium from 500 or from 200 all the way up. That may take a moment to absorb in. But showing just what medium looks like, we do have to pass in. So there's inside that breakpoint variable, you have to pass in a SAS map. So inside here, you just put another object inside there, a list object, and you pass the two breakpoints that you have. So your small and then your large one. So here it's going to say, it's kind of defining that small to 200, and then the medium from 200 to 500, and 500 above is large. So if we look at this, 200, it's white or has no styling applied to it, and then from 200 to 500, it's going to be red, and above 500, it's nothing. So that's just that medium. Now, if I apply small to medium, this is going to be from 0 all the way up to 500. There's also another option that I'm not demoing if you want to break down the large to break down from that dividing point from above and below. But that's documented. And then here is the medium to large. So that's the selector change. Am I losing anyone yet? Is this making sense? Eric, are you bored? All right, cool. All right. So now getting into the last piece, which is the extend. So extend is a directive inside of SAS. So you say @extend and some pseudo selector or some selector, and you can extend the properties. So it would output selector, comma, another selector, comma, another selector, curly brackets, properties. If I said @extend, where I was extending the properties from each other. So with that, it's really difficult because why this is written is if I want to extend maybe a grid system and I have a different selector, or I want to combine two different things, I would have to go through each one and say @extend, @large, @extend, @medium, @extend, @medium to small, and all those variations. So I wrote a mixin inside here that will go through and look at all the options that that selector has and extend it to the new selector. So here we have the color is red, my color is green. So From medium to large, it's red. From medium to large, the background color is green. It's just written down here, so I've added another selector here. Now, if I want to extend this, I'm adding another class, and for the sake of this, it was just called demo. And I say add include suffix extend. And then what I do is I pass an object, which are those two selectors. So I can pass just one selector in there, or I can pass multiple selectors. So here I'm extending dot selector as well as dot another selector. And this works with any type of selector that you have. That's why it has to be in quotes, and you have to define the period, because I could be extending a data attribute or something like that. So by doing this and adding that one class, this demo is going to be red text with green background across the entire site. But then I can also say at medium to large, and from medium size to large sizes, it's going to have that styling only. This library, or this mixin, or whatever this project, has saved me so much code and also efficiency in writing CSS. So here you can see that the demo was extended to all of those, including the base selector name. So it gives me all those options. All right. So here's a use case that probably makes a little bit more sense to everyone, as opposed to just looking at color. So this is actually even showing that this works with some of the base functionality of Sass. And I'm going to show you a quick demo of creating a grid, and it's just using the table CSS setup. So here we have, it says O table cell. It's following BEM conventions. Inside my Sass, I have O table. And inside there, I have the suffixes mixin. And inside there, I have a display table. So that's going to be applied to O table. But it's also being extended to the at large, at small. And then inside there, I have the ampersand double underscore cell, which is going to be compiled out in Sass as O table double underscore cell. But I'm extending the suffix to its children. And then it has a padding left if two of them are next to each other. And that's just CSS. So here we can see that this guy at the desktop, with just the base without any of the suffixes added, it remains the two table cell with the 20 pixel padding in between them. If I change this to at large, now only at large sizes will that grid system exist, and at smaller sizes it stacks. So now I don't have to write CSS to kind of remove it and make something very specific to a use case of I want something at a large size to be a grid, and at a smaller size, I don't want it to be a grid. And then here's kind of the reverse. So at small sizes, it does it. And where this gets really cool is if you're doing something like a grid, like a 2-column grid or 3-column grid, you can use that medium, and you can go from a 3-column to a 2-column to a 1-column very easily. And then if you wanted to, maybe some blocks of code, you don't need to change it from 3 to 2 to 1. Maybe you just need it to stay 3 across the whole site. So like in this example, it remained 2 at the top, but the bottom one kind of stacks. So it gives you a lot of flexibility, and you're using the same selectors. You're just targeting which device width to have. Make sense? So as I said, these projects aren't just related to writing code and necessarily development UI like CSS, HTML, and best practices. Throughout the past 10 years, and especially working with awesome people like Tim Vonderlo, we're always trying to find out the best ways to approach different design elements, especially with the interface and conventions for how we're communicating and talking with our teams. So I came up with this color convention, and basically I was sick of writing this, trying to come up with different names for my colors, as well as the variables in Sass, or as I was communicating with someone, what to call something. And I wanted to break it down in a way that removes semantic colors, as well as making it be something that could extend for brand changes. And since I've adopted this, and we've been doing this on all of our projects here at Cardinal, it has allowed a lot of flexibility and even better communication between the development team as well as with our clients. So how it works is there's a dark color in an interface, and this isn't necessarily even an interface in a brand. So I've seen a lot of brand books, like that thick book that I'm sure all of you have received and read one or glanced at one point in your life, and you see all the colors and you pull up the hex for it. But every interface has a dark color, it has a primary color, and a secondary color. And a lot of brands usually only have a primary and a secondary. Sometimes there's a tertiary color. So this could also be worked. There's an optional tertiary color that you can have in there. And then there's a light color, and then there's an accent color. And this is something that we've identified that a brand may have just these setups, but in an interface, you need a lot more colors than that. And that's where this came from. So for every dark color, there's a dark version of it. There's just the dark version. There's a light version of it. There's an accent. So then there's primary dark, primary light, primary accent, secondary dark, secondary light, secondary accent, light dark, light accent, and go forth. I should just finish at that point. But the idea here is that these have different use cases. And by just creating or identifying these 5 colors, and then there are 4 variations on it, you really don't need to create another color in your interface because you kind of covered the whole spectrum. And that's where like the accent really comes into play. Like you shouldn't be recreating colors. And what this does is it creates consistency from one page to another page, as well as from a designer even working in Photoshop or Sketch or Illustrator, whatever they may be using, to be thinking about the colors that they have. And from a development standpoint, and I have this in my demo on CodePen, you can create your Sass variables as something like color-primary, color-primary dark, color-primary light. So I don't have to think about what is that hex value for my color, or what is our primary color, or even get concerned with it. And it makes it really awesome when you're creating like buttons. So I can create something like a primary button, a secondary button, and just utilize the same colors from here. So it becomes a consistency and an organization for starting to build your interface, as well as communicating and identifying colors. So this is my demo on CodePen, and I have a call out here for the web content accessibility guideline. So as you're building out these colors, and one of the conversations that we have a lot with our clients is about creating their digital brand. And your brand color may be different than the color that you have on the web. So for example, like the cardinal color is that aqua color. And if you print it, it looks like a dark blue. It looks more like a teal on this wall. But in our brand guidelines, it's this like bright poppy blue color. It looks very similar to this. And we haven't really identified if that's our brand color or is that our brand color, because it has so many variations on it. So digital branding, you have to take those things in consideration when you're picking out your hex values or your RGBA colors or whatever solution you want to use for a value. And then in addition to that, creating the contrast for it. So inside this, it's not just this dark, primary, secondary, light, and accent. It's also what is their contrasting color. So if I create a theme and I say it is going to be my secondary theme, I can have my background color be the secondary color, or my secondary color be the value of my secondary variable, but then I can make the color of the text be the secondary color's contrast. So that's why you can also not have to think about what color is going to work. And if you're doing it ahead of time, you never really have to test. And hopefully you're following the web content accessibility guidelines from the beginning. So inside here you see the dark, primary, secondary, light, and accent, the dark variations of it, the primary, and then as well as the secondary, and then the accent at the bottom. And based off that, you should have almost every color that you need in an interface. I've been doing this on my last projects since I came up with this convention, but I was working on it a lot longer, and it's been very helpful and has created consistency. And the really cool benefit of this is I created a pattern lab generator for colors, and I've also now done it in Fabricator. I can go from one project to another project and even port over code by utilizing the same variables, and then just going into my color document and updating my primary color and my secondary color, and I can create a new interface and style buttons that look branded in a matter of moments. That's all I have today. Any questions, comments, concerns?
Is this going in Cardinal's branding in the box?
No.
Yeah.
You kind of stole my question, which was, how do we take this? And I realize you were working on it. But, is there a way that kind of as people work across projects, they can fork it and make improvements or changes or add more extensions? And then can we take that and, for lack of a better word, plug and play into projects just to become more efficient and not, like you said, just not keep rewriting? Something
Yeah.
I'm kind of doing on the C# JavaScript side as well. So just curious.
Yeah, I know here at Cardinal we are working through the best practices and standards, trying to create starter kits or reusable code from project to project to help us efficiency and also standards as well as speed to market for our clients. But right now, I just have these on my CodePen and my GitHub. The ones that are a little bit bigger are on GitHub. But if anyone's interested, I would love input, and I would love to see it being utilized. And I want people to try to find holes in it and break it, so then we can go in there and fix it. And some of these, as going through these, some of them are pretty complex, and they're tied to a lot of methodologies. But whether or not you know those methodologies, if you're following the documentation, it could be a copy and paste. The issue with that is you won't have a seamless, style of writing your code, especially if you're following the prefixes of component, object, utility, and you have another selector right by it. It'll definitely look like multiple developers wrote the code, or someone went out to Stack Overflow and copied and pasted some code. But those standards, on the projects that I work on and Eric's a part of, we definitely follow those. And and I didn't call out, but Eric Katz helped me review, I believe, all of these. And he provided input and tried to tell me some of them were stupid, I think, at some points. But Eric's been very, very helpful. And if you guys don't know this, Eric contributes a lot to the community, so WordPress and even PHP. And he and I have worked on some open source projects, but I'm also very inspired by Eric to continue to do small projects. Yeah. Oh. Do you guys think you're going to use any of these? Cool. Awesome. All right. Yeah. 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 Yeah, so that's my Twitter. It's Nice Transition, and also my CodePen. I definitely put these on my CodePen. So it's codependio.io/nicetransition. Right now, if you go to nicetransition.com, it's the best website. It's just a black page that says A Pirate's Life. So that's, with being involved with so many different things, my personal website's definitely, yeah. So maybe that will be its own project sometime. And I would highly recommend looking up that Jay's blog post, because that's another thing that he wanted to do. He was talking about going to Medium and writing these, and then he wanted to make the project also be about making his own website. So jayclouse.com is his blog now. So that short-term goal turned into his long-term goal of having a blog website. So maybe I'll also take a note from that. Cool. All right. Thank you.